Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Between the Sharks. It's Saturday, the sun is shining, we got a fresh cup of Little Brown Dog coffee. We're going to start working on this 1947 Mercury Convertible Custom. That's right, it's official, 1947. I found the title. How about that? All right, let's get after it. So the car's been here about a week, and I have been doing two things. Stewing over where to start on it, and kind of shopping for things that I knew I would need. I don't want to say fast track it, but like I'm trying to get after it. And, you know, in this day and age, pandemic times, whatever, hopefully if you're watching this in the future, that's a distant memory. And swap meets are flourishing and all of that stuff. But in my area, there aren't that many swap meets. There are the big annual ones, but you know, basically there aren't as many swap meets as there used to be. My guts are telling me I need to make this car a bona fide roller first. So what that means for us is a new rear end, finishing the front end / drop axle, all that other stuff, trying to figure out some kind of steering, maybe getting a motor and transmission at least in there, because when you're setting up suspension and geometry, you really have to have that stuff under load. It's tricky because you kind of need to work on it while it's not under load, but really all your measurements need to come when there's weight on the car. So I think that's where we've got to start. So what does that mean for today? Today, I don't know why I'm nervous about it, but it just feels, because right now it rolls on the rear axle. This rear end is the stock torque tube rear end. I think it's 41 to 48. It may be 46, 7, 8. I'm not really sure exactly what years this is. I think it's 41 to 48. So that rear end is indeed incomplete. It has no backing plates on it. I'm not really sure what has been done to it. The transmission and the flathead are long gone from this car. Never saw them, don't know where they went. And we are most likely going to be running a small block Chevy. I understand. For some of you hearing small block Chevy, it's like, I roll, so boring, whatever. But if you ask me, putting a motor that wasn't designed for this car in this car with a transmission and a new rear end is a reasonably tall order and fun enough to get your hot rod skills going. On top of that, I don't really do the show car circuit. I don't really Sunday drive. I drive daily. And in order to do that in modern traffic with modern traffic speeds, I need a little oomph. I'm not saying you can't do it with a flathead. I'm not saying you can't do it with an Olds Rocket or a Cadillac or whatever. The small block is my choice because really this is going to be a closed hood car and I want it to be fun to jump into and turn the key. Now granted, I only speak a certain generation of small block, and well, that's turning out that that's kind of old school now too, because everyone's doing LS motors and I know nothing about them. I can't do the computer thing. So we're going to set this up with an early overhead valve Chevy V8, not something that's too distant from what really could have been put in a car like this in the 50s, because basically after 1955, they were putting Chevys in everything as fast as they could, same as the Hemis and the Rockets and the Cadillacs, and the Flatheads were kind of, you know, kind of moving away in the late 50s. So anyway, I digress. In my week of shopping, knowing that I was going to try to make a roller out of it first, if I could, find the parts and all that stuff, I came across this. It is, I believe, in very good shape. Just came out of a car 1 week ago. Buick Olds Pontiac 12-bolt posi rear end. Yep. I don't care about posi at all. This thing has two things that are really important to me. One, it is basically the right width. Maybe within a quarter of an inch of what the stock rear end is in this car, which is like 60 inches, mounting surface to mounting surface. And it has 273 gears. I know, for anybody that's like, you know, stoplight to stoplight racer or has drag strip dreams, you might have just thrown up in your mouth a little bit. I don't. This is the perfect cruiser rear end for me. We can do the rear end math, but basically with the tire size we'll run on this thing and a standard 1-to-1 final drive, we should be able to do 70, 75 miles an hour without a problem, which is pretty cool. When you're taking out a torque tube and placing an open driveline rear end in, you got to figure out how you're going to mount it. Basically, how are you going to suspend it? What is the suspension is that question. So I am going to run a stock style transverse leaf spring, you know, the regular one that hangs behind the axle. And we'll get into how we're going to mount that on the rear end. But that is going to provide us with some challenges because, like all of these early car rear ends and truck rear ends, really, anything up to the early 50s, you might run across this. These rear radius rods that go from the outside edges of the axle and then form a triangle to our torque tube, plus our torque tube that is solidly mounted, well, would have been, all the way up to our transmission and frame. That's what kept the axle centered and kept axle wrap from happening. So when you accelerate, the axle wants to twist up. When you brake, it wants to twist down. And, you know, Sir Fig Newton will explain all the physics on that. If anybody's really interested, like I said, I'll call Dr. Science and we can explain all of that. But for us, what it means is we are not only going to need to put brackets on our new rear end that mount our transverse rear spring, we are also going to need to find ways to replicate something like this that keeps our axle from rolling down when we brake and twisting back up when we accelerate, or vice versa in reversa. The next challenge is this rear end and torque tube are one piece essentially at the moment, and it goes from where the wheels are to here. So somehow we got to get the car up high enough to drag that whole thing out. Then we have a car that no longer rolls, so lickety split, we're gonna have to figure out at least enough to get that mounted. All right, so I actually don't have a full plan for this. In fact, I jumped on this on a lark, and I knew I wanted to run the rear transverse spring instead of buying a parallel leaf spring kit, which is indeed made for this car. All 41 to 48 Fords, it's, you know, there are less options than there used to be. I think chassis engineering closed, which is kind of a bummer. But anyway, this is the way I decided to do it. So I've got these brackets, which we'll weld onto our axle down here, and that'll hold our spring. But as far as locating our axle, both right to left and keeping it from twisting, I just don't know. For those of you more muscle car knowledgeable than I am, there is, what is it, a trailing arm, 4-bar, 4-link, you name it, set up under these Chevelles. So the Chevelles and A-body cars basically had coil springs. So they were held in place by trailing arms that came off on the bottom here, and then triangulated upper arms that came off like so. And maybe we'll use some of that. I don't know. I don't know. I think it'd be neat if we could reuse the radius rods, but these are not the most convenient style to reuse. For hot rodders taking note, you're looking for 35, 36 rear radius rods because they unbolt and have the spring mount attached to them. Because of the way that this is, I think anything that we do that makes the geometry right, the ride good, and the rear end work is all we're really going to need. This car does weigh a lot, so we are going to need, you know, all the torque lever arm things to keep it from twisting, but we're going to be cruising in this, so it's not like we're going to be trying to launch hard every time we hit a stoplight. All right, fellas. Thought I would bring in here. We're under the back end of the car. If you know, oh, that's interesting. Need to orient yourselves here. What is this? A panhard bar? Is that what you call a whoop-de-doo, like so? That kind of hooks onto the frame and then hooks on over here, which helps. It allows the axle to go up and down, but kind of helps keep it centered. Now the spring would normally go from these shackles that I cut off It mounts to this cross member and then over to that other shackle on the other side. I got a little hasty and just cut them off because I wanted to see how the car would look low, and I just snatched the spring right out of it. And I guarantee you, it looks very good low, sitting on basically just a 2x4. Well, fellas, here's a challenge. So the front of the torque tube is actually right kind of up there. I can't even get you into it. You see it? That's the front of the torque tube. And then if you look, it is all in this big convertible cross member. So we've got to get it to like move back, I don't know, something like 18 inches before we can start sneaking this thing out sideways. Challenge accepted. We got a lot of surface rust under here that I don't really want to deal with, but we're gonna. Don't worry about that, we will. Just gotta figure out how. Alright, fellas. So I'm trying to find the perfect place to lift it so that I can still get a jack stand in there where it's pretty strong, because the reality on these things is when you're trying to deal with a torque tube and radius rods and, you know, the stuff that we're dealing with, you need a lot of space to get them out, because, well, what I'm saying is we don't have enough room to go back with it, and we gotta kind of take it out the side, which means you gotta kind of hop over the jack stands that you're gonna put in place. So, you know, the name of the game here is see how few times we can actually move the jack stands. Alright, well, that's all she wrote. Guess what I didn't do? Grab any jack stands. Dang it. Confused myself already. I shouldn't do that, really. What I'm saying is, all I've done is lift the frame. I don't think this distance is out of the ordinary for the spring travel. So, either the shock is totally seized and lifting the rear end, and we're going to probably put tube shocks on. Remember, closed hood car, fenders, no one, you know. Or that ratchet strap is holding everything together. So let's assess and try doing this different. The way this thing is sitting, it's starting to look like the cover of like Valley High School Teenagers from Hell or something. All right, let's see if we can snatch this shock off, because it's not going to stay on this car anyway. I do like seeing these on period cars, but in my opinion, it's got to be pretty darn period to bother with these or rebuilding them. That said, these will never go in the scrap pile. I'll either hang on to them for a project like that if I feel so inclined, or, you know, donate them to somebody that's doing something like that, because they are neat. I didn't do anything. I wonder if it's those ratchet straps. Oh yeah, could be. Could be. Alright, let's deal with it next. This Flintstone's rear section is definitely going to be an inconvenience in the future, but may as well take advantage of it now. Alright. Come on. This wood block rear suspension. That's my doing. I'm a genius. I was just sitting so high when I got it, and like, one of these things that's super fun about these cars is really mocking it up and seeing what it's going to look like in the future. We're getting to that point on the T, which, you know, it's going to be pretty good. I definitely did it years and years ago when I first got it. But this thing too, I really can't wait to get the front end down. It really has never been sitting low in the front, so once we get this back end in, we'll deal with the front end, which is this whole can of worms. But that's a different can of worms for a different kind of day for worms. Just kind of sitting here looking at stuff. Future me has his hands full. Good gravy. Like, what? What? Oh, maybe that's stock. Huh. All right, fellas. Coffee's kicking in, or I'm getting smarter. I think it's the coffee. Decided to take one of those really crappy Harbor Freight car roller things that don't work very well for actually rolling a car, because they basically just don't work. Shove it under the rear end. We'll pull the tires off, reducing the weight of the rear end. And then maybe we can roll that dude back a little bit, enough. It's 18 inches, that's more than a little bit, to get the drive shaft out of the X member, and then maybe snatch it out the side. So we wrestled this thing out of here, and figure it might be worthwhile to go over the basics of how this worked in the early Fords, and how we're gonna mimic, replace, or whatever with our open driveline rear end. Open driveline meaning does not have a torque tube. The drive shaft is enclosed in this torque tube. It is called a torque tube because basically it functions as a huge lever so that when the tires spin, well, this stays in place instead of trying to spin with the tires. So the way that it worked with the old Fords is they had a spring that went like so. They had a bar that attached from here to the frame to center the rear end so that it wouldn't go right to left. Now, of course, that bar would allow it to go up and down with the spring. And then these radius rods, that's not attached to anything, interesting, would basically work with the torque tube to keep the axle from wrapping itself up. So my plan is to use this very heavy transverse rear spring. We'll probably take some leaves out of it and clean it all up. Maybe get a reverse eye to lower everything, but we'll go over that when that happens. These spring mounts are actually part of our axle tubes on the early Ford rear end. 35, 36 Fords, they were part of the radius rods, so if you're building a hot rod, those are the ones you're looking for. There's really nothing we can do to use these. So, enter these brackets. We will weld them onto our new axle that's sitting just over yonder. We will use a stock style set of shackles to attach our transverse leaf spring to our new axle, and then our car is indeed suspended at that point. However, we will need to do the two other things that are inherent in this rear end. We will need to use a panhard bar of some kind, hopefully the one that's already in the car, to keep the axle from going right to left, because the shackles do have some movement in that direction. And then we are going to have to do something to replace the function of the torque tube and the radius rods. We have a couple of options. We can try to repurpose the radius rods. We may have to reinforce them. We could get a ladder bar kit, or first things first, we are going to get these put on in the right place to hold our transverse spring. Then we're going to decide if we want to use any of this crazy bracketry under there, or if we want to start, building something else. All right, gang. We have got some good old-fashioned investigating to do. I was getting ready to, figuring out how to do this on our new axle. I took another look at our spring here. 6 million years ago, I just cut these to see what the car would look like sitting down, but obviously these were indeed custom shackles. They appear very poorly made, so, not worried at all about cutting those. However, a fellow might notice sizes are quite different. So I don't think I have the wrong parts here, but maybe I do. I don't know. I gotta get this out, see what's going on, see what they've done, because I don't know. Oh dear. This is gonna be no fun. I'm gonna require fire. This is usually fun, but fire and rubber makes for very smelly, not fun. So this is some kind of lock nut. You can tell by looking at it, but it doesn't look like a nylock. You know, the kind with the nylon. Woo! Smells like burning rubber. All right, that's helping. Nope. What am I looking at here, guys? This doesn't feel right. All right, here's a true story, common story about hot rodding, working on old junk, whatever. So, not gonna name any names, but you know, someone suggested that this setup was going to be correct for a 35 all the way up through 48 rear spring. Now, a little out of practice, so I said, okay, sure, that'll do. Now, here are the bushings that came out of the spring, and I do believe this is a stock spring. It is 2 1/4 wide, it does all the other things. It was under the car. And I looked at like an actual restoration company's information, Dennis Carpenter, and it seems that the shackles for the rear springs should have, oh, something more different than what we've got going on here. So, what does that mean? It means, I gotta figure out what to do. All right, so I went ahead and pulled all this mess out, and it gets more and more curiouser. There's no bushing in here at all anymore. So they just had this metal on metal. But again, it's very curious to me because this still doesn't fit, right? The 7/16 is still equally loose, but this new shackle bushing doesn't fit either. So I'm a little baffled as to what the original rear shackle was, but it seems to mean that even if I ordered it from Dennis Carpenter, it's not going to be right for all of the mishmash of parts I'm going to be putting together. I don't know what I'm going to do. Really, that's what I'm telling you. I am a little frustrated with it, but at this point, it seems like a foolish thing to do to continue on and weld in our new perches on our new to us rear end without having the spring here. Like, we need all the parts on hand, which I thought I had, but apparently I don't, because the brand new parts that I bought don't fit the way they were advertised to fit. It's another day. We're gonna have to take some of that, you know, enthusiasm and walk it back and actually take stock of what we have. Because we got a lot, but it doesn't work. Let's dive in. So here I am, happy-go-lucky, thinking, all right, not bad. Had the car here for a week, got a rear end that fits, got some bracketries. Let's do a swap. That way we can get this car to be in a roller lickety-split. Not so. All right, so let's take a look. We are roughly 3 degrees, right? Double check, triple check, quadruple check. Yoki Madoodle on the pinion, which is what we want. Our drive line is going to come down at 3 degrees. We'll discuss that in more detail if anybody has any questions. Now, I double checked my spring perch centers on the 48 Ford rear end. Looks like 46 3/4 to me. Was not able to reconfirm that on the interwebs. So I think I'm within a 1/4 inch. Obviously I'm just doing it with a tape measure. Now I just have to center my 2 new spring mounts on this rear axle, 46 3/4 inches apart. Fellas, this is why hot rodding just really can't be done with kits, even if they've got a kit for the thing, right? If this is your first time, this will get you killed. Ready? Check this out. Follow along. This instruction sheet applies to both rear mount and top mount springs. Sure, fine. Place the rear end under the car. Mount spring to frame mounts. That means you use the U-bolts and, attach it to your cross member. Make sure the rear end is level. Weld part of brackets at least 1 1/2 inches beyond the spring eye on either side of the spring. It's asking you to do this under the car. To determine the position of the brackets on the axle housings, mount the spring and put the weight of the car on it. Do not mount the brackets if the spring is not supporting the car's full weight. What? Guys, if you try to put the car's full weight with the brackets not mounted, the car's just gonna fall onto the axle and you. Why would you do this under the car? You're clearly swapping rear ends. I think you should throw these things out. I'll show you what we're gonna do. All right, so the internet's full of garbage parts and bad measurements and whatever else. I've determined my only hope is to mimic what existed, and then at the very least, I can use the stock spring, maybe get the eyes reversed, maybe have a fighting chance at buying something for a 4678 Ford that fits a 4678 Ford. Exempla gratia, these pieces that I ordered from Speedway say that they will work from 35 to 48. However, the shackle length is different. There are just things that don't really match up. That's fine, you can't hot rod out of a kit. But that said, I'm gonna stick with stock measurements. So what I've done is I've just cut a piece of conduit. I know, it's garbage. I'm gonna square these things up, like, I'm using the square so we're at the end of the table so they're even. I'm using the square to show that they're indeed vertical. And then I will use the square to show they're square to our table edges. I don't know if you guys can see that, but basically like so. I'm gonna weld this together. That should keep my centers spaced to 46 3/4, just like I need them to be to match stock. And then I can take it over to my rear axle as an assembly, because what that's going to do is to help us out with not only the critical dimension spacing it out right to left, but also we need these things to be perfectly aligned. If they're off a little bit, your spring is going to twist. In best case scenario, if your spring is twisting, it's going to bind, and that's going to make for a really crappy ride. Worst case, you're going to break something. So let's start here. So I'm checking square off the table. I'm making sure we're even with the end of the table, which we are here. And I'm going to go ahead and tack this on. All right, let's duplicate these measurements over here on our other side. And all right, basically just trying to repeat what we've got going on the other side here. Obviously, I need this thing to be hitting the same point on both brackets, otherwise our measurement is not going to be quite as useful as we want. Those of you paying close attention can see we've got a little bit of a problem. The original trailing arm brackets and shock mounts are going to be in our way. All right, gang, that was no fun at all. Just lots of grinding and cutting. Makes a guy think he ought to invest in a plasma cutter, that's for sure. But I kind of, it's mocked up, you know. It's not the prettiest mock-up or the cleanest workspace, but I'm just trying to keep moving forward, and it's kind of precarious. But before I get into what this is and how it is, let's look through the mess over here and see if I can explain it. So you're just gonna have to bear with me a little bit and like squint and use your imagination. What we're getting into is pinion angle on the driveline and how I do it and why. There are so many opinions about it. Honestly, I double checked myself on the old internet before I set up what is sort of mocked up here. And there was more than enough information for me to confuse even myself. So I went back to the basics, which is when you have a small block Chevy set up and the intake is level, the engine's about 3 degrees down at the tail shaft of the transmission. That's just the way it works. I don't know why it works that way, but I know that that's why you can't have a marine intake or anything like that, because those engines are set at a different angle. Thus, you know, your intake would be all wrong in a car. So basically, when I set a small block in, I level at the intake, which puts the tail shaft at 3 degrees down, typically. My experience. If you know more stuff or know where to find more information, there's a comment section. Please just go ahead and say what you got to say. So that said, the way I have always done things is to level intake means 3 degrees-ish down at your tail shaft. So I tend to do the rear ends at 3 degrees up. That's how I learned how to do it. That's what the magazines I read said to do, and I've never had any trouble with it. And I'm going to continue to do that. Now, if you look close enough on the internet, the one reason that you wouldn't want them in a straight line like that, that I read, was that it doesn't force the caps to spin on your universal joint, thus not lubricating your universal joints the way they're supposed to. But that's only true, in my opinion, if you live in a complete vacuum, meaning you never accelerate, you never decelerate, you never hit a bump, because that is the only way on the planet that everything would stay perfectly in line, because the rear end is going to move independent of the front end of your car. So I think the U-joints will get plenty of work out. I am not an expert on this. I have not gone to school for this. I am not an engineer. I'm just an amateur hot rod guy. But that's my 2 cents. So what are we doing here? Let's just go back to this. The yoke is representing the pinion angle at 3 degrees up. Remember? 3 degrees down. Then I have shimmed these things so they are pretty close to 0. So that way our spring will be seated in the car and sitting in a neutral position. In theory, this will be 3 degrees up to match the 3 degrees down on our motor. Other than that, it's just centered. And I centered it by coming off the backing plate and measuring on both sides. We're equidistant. That's good. And then our bar that's welded in there is maintaining our spacing that we have determined to be accurate based on the existing mounts on the original rear end. At this point, it's ready to tack weld. And yeah, let's think about that for a second. So setting up suspensions has always been one of those things, right? So I'm saying this is ready to tack. So in theory, if the car is sitting level, then the pinion angle will sit at 3 degrees. I guess that's what I'm thinking. The thing about suspensions that I've learned is that you can't really set them up until they're loaded, and you can't load them until they're kind of set up. All right, gang, we're working on a delicate balance here. I have tacked this well, I think. I chose to use the 110 MIG for now. I need enough oomph for it to hold the car up, suspended, and not break. And I need to be able to backtrack if I have to. If we need to adjust something, to be able to cut these tacks and, you know, try again. I'm gonna haul this old rear end back up to the car and maybe slide it under there, and then maybe we'll break apart the leaf pack, pull a few leaves out, because either way we want it lower and we want it less stiff, and that'll be closer to the final reality of how we're running it. And maybe that'll be good enough to mock it up. I don't know. We've got some sloppiness and shackles and some other things to deal with, but with any luck, it'll maybe kind of work. I gotta clean up. I'm filthy. I am covered in metal shavings and dust. Today Honestly, for a first attempt at a video on the Mercury, it's shown me who's boss. I'll tell you what. I can't say this has been fun or really inspiring or confidence building, honestly. But, you know, there are days like that. All right, gang, that's gonna about do it for me today. I am bushed. I think I chose the hardest way to do a lot of different things. But the rear end seems to fit pretty well underneath the car, which is a good sign. I mean, measurements told us it would, but it's always good to confirm. I think I have a solution to at least move forward on the rear spring and mock it up. I've got a feeling we're gonna need to do a ton of work to lower this car down. It's sitting kind of sky high, and the spring's only gonna raise the rear end. Granted, there's no motor or anything in it, but we got a work cut out for us. But the good news is we can actually start that work because we're kind of mocked up. Hopefully that pinion angle that we set will be kind of the right one, but we won't know till we know. This was a rough start to this project. None of it went the way I thought it would, but at least we still made progress. Took an extra day, but you know, progress is progress. Anyway, thank you guys for watching Between the Sharks. I hope your projects are going more smoothly than this, and we will see you next time when we try to shove that rear spring under there, or if I pretend that that is even a thing left to do and start somewhere else on some other thing. So, if you want to follow this project along, please consider subscribing. If that's not your bag, that's cool too. Either way, hopefully see you next time on Between the Sharks.